Okay, here we go. We're proceeding from the prologue to the first part of the novel. The prologue was necessary to create circumstances and characters and the beginning of the plot. The novel is filled with all sorts of twists and turns and surprises. There are multiple storylines, stories within a story, because it's a generation. It's a family saga. It's generational. So here we go. Fires going in the fireplace, crackling and sending out little bits of light and warmth. Animals asleep at my feet, 2 cats, a dog, and a wolf. That's right. You heard me correctly. 80% gray wolf, sweet little thing. Hopefully she won't howl while I'm doing this. Bob and the Wolf Dogs, like and subscribe. You can see a picture of the sweet little beast. We call her Honey. So I do know what I'm talking about when I create a wolf character. In fact, every part of this novel is rooted in accuracy. It comes heavily researched. It's accurate geographically, historically, and theologically. Okay, we begin. Part 1 of Before They Awaken, King David's Lost Crown, and it begins with a quote from Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, Song of Myself. Or else I am awake for the first time, and all before has been a mean sleep. 22 years earlier. Part 1, this takes place 6 years after the speculated birth of the Christ child, which was year 46 of the calendar, of the Julian calendar, the calendar of Pater Patriae, Gaius Julius Caesar. I took 4 years of Latin in school, and I still have trouble with that language. Year 0 of the Gregorian calendar, 0 AD. This is chapter 9, The Happening Never to Be Spoken Of, takes place in the Northern Kingdom. In a time of human turmoil, back when men and women did unspeakable things to one another in the name of God and goodness, when power was measured by the ability to control and dominate, when masculinity was defined as a man's ability to inflict physical injury on another man, when God slept with virgins and sired demigods, when men and women envisioned deity as a creature demanding subservience and the sacrificial blood of living things, a young man walked alone on the road to Caesarea Philippi. The Hebrew pronunciation is Caesarea, but since most people use the Greek, most people are familiar with the Greek pronunciation, we'll use that, Caesarea Philippi. He was dressed in the habits of a Jewish temple priest. If he stopped and listened, he could hear the Dan off to his right from down an embankment, hidden beyond the green risings of trees and papyrus thickets, rushing silent and deep and green, to join with other rivers and creeks to form the holiest of them all, the River Jordan. Smoke was rising from somewhere in the distance to create a haze along the long upward sloping ridges of Hermon. It would have almost had a beauty to it had it not painted of death with its hues of filtered sunshine, of subtle colors. A flock of birds burst into the air from within the papyrus thickets. Something was in there. He should have kept going. Nothing good could come from investigating whatever creature it was that made those birds fly like that. But curiosity forced the young man to stop and look. The reeds were bunched together as tight as the trunks of trees, forming a virtual wall of green, and fanned out at the top into sprays of millions of tiny needles. It gave it almost a rolling, soft appearance. A surprise awaited him as he carefully parted the reeds. The thing that had caused the birds to swarm was a woman, young and raven-haired. She must not have been familiar with the northern regions, otherwise she would have known that she was not safe. She would have known that the swamps of the Hula Valley were replete with inhospitable creatures, some as large as oxen, others small enough to fit within the palm of your hand and equally as deadly. She would have known that she was entering the lair of Leviathan, the worst of them all. The sun was hot and the air cool from a wind blowing in from the coast, having in it no hint whatsoever of peril, carrying in it only the essence of the upcoming season change, a dampness, a freshness, and the feel and smell of the good earth about to renew itself. So often that's the way it is with danger. It comes when one is least expecting it. The young man watched as she waded ankle deep into the film-covered and stagnant water, watched as she parted more of the tall reeds and disappeared into them. He followed and found that beyond the papyrus, beyond the fortress of green, was deep water, freshened by the backwashing of the dam. He watched with a quickening of his heart as she dropped the veil and loosed her long black hair, watched as she stepped from her gold-embroidered purple garments and hung them on a cluster of reeds high up. He watched as she slipped into the slow-moving swirls and began stroking with surprising skill out into the middle with an unexpected look of strength displayed in the suppleness of her bare arms and legs as they powered her through the smooth current. He watched as the eyes of Leviathan broke the surface, just the eyes, like two stones sticking up. A smooth wake traced the beast's path as it followed her. The attack came swiftly. The water in an instant turned to a churning boil, then lay quiet. The woman's blood rolled up to the surface in a single surge of crimson bottom water, turned up by the monster's attempts to hide her in the mud. The young man was not possessed of great courage in that moment. He simply did not take the time to think of how utterly foolish it would be to dive into that water. Armed with nothing more than a Roman short sword he carried for cutting tree branches and digging roots, he swam toward the cloud of black at the bottom. Leviathan is 3 times the size of a man. He is as a snake, but is armored and has legs and is stronger and far more cunning. His head is long and his nose flat, and when he opens his mouth, it's large enough to swallow a man whole and is filled with 1,000 fangs. The young man wrestled the enormous crocodile, come inland from the great sea, as some of them do, attracted by the still waters of the swamps. This one was bigger than most. Someone had tried unsuccessfully to catch it. A frayed and decaying rope, short, broken at the end, hung from its neck, no match for the mammoth strength the thing possessed. The creature probably had been intended as an exotic treat for the games where the fiercest of animals are matched up. The young man had once seen a carving on a lampstand of a lion and a crocodile tearing at one another. He looked in the crocodile's eyes and held on as the beast thrashed him about, with lungs ready to burst, trying to think, prepared to die. He plunged his sword into the huge underside of its neck. Blood poured out. With sudden hope, he fought harder. He thrust the sword again and again, until at last Leviathan floated away. He felt around in the darkness of the blood and the billowing mud. He absolutely couldn't see a thing. He found nothing. He kicked around in a circle, fighting against the current, and reached everywhere. Still his hands touched nothing. He surfaced. The weakness in his limbs and the terror of breath choked off by sprays of water only fortified his determination. He tried again and again, found nothing. Again he dove. This time he found her. The last place he dared look, in the mouth of the beast. Leviathan was dead, his grip loose. The young man was able to pry her free, hearing flesh rip on the creature's teeth. He must have fallen faint for a time, because the next thing he remembered was the woman lying beneath him, coughing and gasping. He didn't remember how he got her to shore, or even how he himself had made it to shore. Skin and bone on the right side of her face had been torn away, having ripped with it her beauty. Her ribs were broken and crushed, visibly torn and punctured. He cradled her head in his lap and stroked her hair and talked to her, because he didn't know what else to do. Not even the finest of Caesar's surgeons could fix that kind of damage. His first inclination had been to go for help, but she stopped him. "Stay with me," she said. "If you leave, I fear I will be dead by the time you return," she implored. Drips of water falling from his head made her twitch. Each sensation seemed to cause her pain. The simplest thing, the breeze, a tiny crawling ant, the very act of breathing. Though she did not complain, she seemed content to hear him talk. It was someone to hold her as she died, a friend, a comfort, as she passed into the terrifying unknown. Strangers a moment ago, now bonded, fused by a horrific trauma. Using half-formed and halting words, uttered after first taking sputtering breaths for strength, she told him as best she could about her life, and asked about his. She was the daughter of a wealthy widowed grain merchant, she said. She and her father were staying close by in Malaha, she told him, a town older than Abraham. The young man knew the town well. It brushed the foothills of Hermon, on land rolling and fertile that rises to the hills on the north and drops down to the swampland on the south where flows the Dan. Their home was in Caesarea on the coast, south of the Sea of Galilee, she said, but they were there in the northern sector because of the trouble in the south, the rioting that had been ongoing in the wake of Herod's death, and because her father had land holdings here in the north. She swims in the morning, she said, because that is the time one can be closest to God. The young man told her he was a priest, serving mostly in the temple in Jerusalem, but traveling at times to the synagogues of the towns and the cities, as he was that day. She allowed a smile to form, even though to do so caused pain, and with a raised and trembling finger she pointed to his forehead. Ah, that is why the box. Though the beast had stripped away part of her face, it had left her mouth intact so that she was still able to speak. Likewise were her eyes spared from the mauling, so that she could use them to view the chambers of the young man's soul. For in fact, she seemed to be looking that deep. He reached up. He was surprised that it was still there, the phylactery, the small square pouch, bound to his forehead by a thin strap, as is required of a priest, containing writings of the prophets close to the head, never to be out of mind. A priest is also required to wear one on his sleeve, he said. I'm afraid that one is gone. Half his tunic was gone, the rest clinging to him like a shroud of ice, shivering him, though the air was warm. She tended to dip her head and widen her eyes before speaking, as if hoping the expressions themselves could convey the words, in case she was unable to push them forth. Are you a Sadducee or a Pharisee? Politics don't concern me much, he told her. A Pharisee, I guess, if you must label me, which annoys my father, but then what doesn't annoy my father? Unlike the Sadducees, I believe in life after death and in a resurrection. And unlike the Sadducees, I am not wealthy. That I expect would make me a Pharisee. I'm a simple man. I study the law, the inner mysteries, and I teach the children in the temple courts. I copy scrolls. My hand is good, and I write letters. My father is a Sadducee, she said. Each word came with care, artfully. It was important to her that she be understood. You and he would certainly make a pair, she said. She would have laughed, had her trembling body permitted it. They talked about many things. He didn't know how long, minutes, it could have been hours. Then he interrupted himself with his own tears because he realized that death was upon her, perhaps with her next breath. And he said something foolish. Maybe it was just compassion that caused him to speak the last words she would ever hear. Maybe it was only a moment of supreme empathy, perhaps only a strange lapse in the thought process, an illusion born of the trauma. Whatever the reason, whatever the illusion, he seemed connected to this woman with a type of unexplained bliss transcending rationality, as if saying goodbye to a love of many years, as if they had lived a lifetime together. I do believe, as insane as it may sound, I do believe that I might be falling in love with you, is what he said. Those were the words that came out of his mouth. It caused her to smile. I am pledged to another, she said, upon breath barely present, by my parents at my birth. As am I, he said. I don't even know your name, she said. He told her that his name was Mahlir, and that his father was Matthias, the high priest under Herod who pulled down Caesar's golden eagle from over the great gate of the temple. King Herod had installed the eagle in defiance of the law that forbids us to create images of living things. My father and some of the other priests and leaders pulled it down and hacked it to pieces. The king had him burned alive for the deed, or at least that's what the king and everybody thought. Herod's guards were supporters of my father and believers in his way, and they were able to spirit him away under cover of darkness. It was another prisoner who was burned. My father lives in exile in a faraway place. I am a priest of the highest order, he continued. I am of the line of Bilgah. I was born during the 9th year of the reign of Caesar Augustus, at the 10th hour of the 5th day of Yule, to Jewish parents in the holy city of Jerusalem. My lineage can be traced all the way back to the first priest. It is written down in the scrolls of our family. My father was Matthias, his father was Margalothus, his father was Nashon, his father was Berechiah, and on it goes, back 31 generations to Bilgah. Bilgah, as you know, was one of the 24 descendants of Aaron selected by King David as keepers of the Ark of the Covenant. For all these generations, my father and my father's fathers have kept watch over the tablets and have offered the appropriate sacrifices and incense and prayers of atonement for the people, and have done so honorably and without defilement. After the tablets were lost during the exile, we kept watch over their resting place, knowing someday they would be found. There are thousands of us who have come down from the original 24. All are priests, a few serving permanently in the temple, like me, most serving in various synagogues and ministering in the temple on a rotating basis. Her motionless lips, the whites of her eyes, her half-closed lids let him know that she may not have heard any of it, that she was somewhere else, that he was now alone. Had she lived but a moment or two longer, she would have heard him speak the name of his father. She would have recognized it. Her own father spoke it often. He was proud that his daughter would someday marry the son of the high priest who had pulled down Caesar's golden eagle. Neither did Mahler know that the dead woman in his arms was the one to whom he had been betrothed at birth. A short time ago, his body was shaking because it was cold. Now it shook because of desperation. He wanted to reach down and mend her, to somehow put her together. His muscles may have even twitched in efforts to do so. Instead, he simply looked skyward into the vast emptiness and spoke to it, asking, wishing, demanding that this tender and gentle angel, whom he didn't even know, be restored the foolish impossible, promising he would care for her and protect her if it be done, and never do her harm. Then he brought his eyes back to reality, back to her disfigured body, motionless, stilled of breath, and tried to think of what he should do next, who he should seek out to come for the body. He suddenly realized that his tunic had been so continuously wet, and he realized it was not from the water, it was from her blood, now turning sticky, itching his skin. He looked up again into the emptiness of the approaching night, but saw through the film of his moist eyes no angels, no God, only shaded ruffles of pink and red, a gentle fire rolling across the sky. Between the fire and the hilltops were ribbons of sapphire blue. It surprised him that the hour was so late. She had been in his arms the entire afternoon and evening. He felt tranced. An odd scent came to his nostrils, tangled in amongst the odors of the river. It was an unfamiliar scent, yet familiar in a way, a fresh smell, like alabaster. The way an empty anointing jar might smell, akin to the clean, powdery smell of a craftsman's shop, though mixed with a touch of perfume. He began to stare ahead at the things in front of him, the clumps of high grass poking out of the mossy, matted soil, the blooms of the white squill, the winged water insects darting in and out of the foliage. He was seeing but not focusing, and soon became aware that he was looking at the face of a child peering nervously out of the reeds. At first, Mahler thought he was looking at an apparition of his mind, the kind that tends to come to those under the stress of exhaustion. But this apparition was no apparition. This was indeed a child. The child jerked like he was preparing himself to run, rustling the reeds and rippling the water into which dipped the ends of his crudely made cloak and tunic. Of mixed wool and camel hair, the garment looked to be. Mahler spoke harshly, annoyed at being startled. "Away with you! I'm sorry if you're lost, but I am not able to help you. The road to Malaha is up there on the rise in back of us. You can find somebody to help you up there. It's well-traveled. Go, go." The child simply stood there, a look of sadness upon his face. He could not have been any more than 5 or 6. "Go," Mahler shouted, "for I take a stick to you. Then you will not only have a smarting backside, but will be ceremoniously unclean as well, because I have touched the dead. Now go, go." Still the child remained immobile. "Do you not hear? I said off with you. Now go. You are intruding on a very private moment." Still the child did not move. Again Mahler shouted, louder. "Now, go, go, out of my sight. Go, go, go. Go on, go." The child jumped and began to cry, little sobs that caused his body to shake. Mahler was suddenly filled with shame. His sorrow should not be such that it harms others. The boy was far too young to be alone on a road beset by thieves. Mahler shook his head and smiled. "Hey, little one, Come here. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. Come, sit. I will care for you and see that you are reunited with your family. Do you have family? Come, sit over here, right by me. The child affirmed he did by nodding. Where are they? Mahler asked. The child shrugged. Can you not speak? He shrugged again. Comfort then came from Mahler's mouth. Hey, little one, it's all right. There's nothing for you to fear. I won't hurt you, and neither will the woman I hold. Yes, she is dead, but the dead cannot hurt you. This I know, for I am a priest of Yahweh. She was killed by Leviathan, which is all the more reason for you to do as I say and come out of that water. There may be more of them in there. Come here and sit by me. I will help you. The child looked at Mahler eye to eye, still not moving. Mahler was even more ashamed because the gaze stirred within him, protectiveness overwhelming. Come, child, Mahler repeated, so softly, so very powerfully, that he was surprised mere words could carry such force. Please. The tenderness must have reassured the boy. He stepped from the water and walked toward Mahler. That's a child. Here, sit by me, right here, until I can determine what should be done with this situation of ours. There was a grass clump next to Mahler. The boy sat on it and waited obediently. I suppose we should take care of you first, Mahler said. So, ever watchful for the eyes of Leviathan? Mahler laid aside the unknown woman and waded into the water to bathe himself free of the blood and to wash it from his clothing. But his tunic would not come clean. Large blotches continued to obscure its holiness, its white purity. The embroidered gold and purple band running shoulder to him was so stained that its separate colors were undistinguishable, and all 4 of his tassels were soiled. I fear I cannot help you, he had to tell the boy. I have broken a law. I have touched the dead and have corrupted myself with its blood. For a priest to touch the dead is forbidden. It is written in the commandments laid down by Moses that if a priest makes himself unclean by touching one who has died, he must immediately cleanse himself with water and must immediately wash his clothes. He will remain unclean until evening. Then he will be able to be free then to touch and be touched. As you can see, I am unable to cleanse myself. Mahler looked at the child, then at the sun, a ball of yellow sinking into the hills, casting out its red glow. Above was blackness. It is nearly nightfall. If only I could wash out this blood. I'm fine. Now I must wait another day. He walked over and knelt in front of the boy. I have no choice. Before I am allowed to move among people, I must be clean. Until I cleanse myself and robe myself in clean garments and remain unsoiled for a day, I cannot walk with you and lead you. I cannot even touch you. It is the law. It's a law laid down by God through Moses. What I must do is this. I must travel to Malaha, maybe as far as Kadesh, to obtain new garments. It's not far. I will return tomorrow. I will bring food and stay with you until evening, until I am clean. Then we will look for your family and for the family of the dead woman. Now, you must promise me, while I am gone, you will stay here. You will not move. And you must not touch the dead woman's body. Mahler climbed the rocky hillside to the road and left the child alone in the dark with the Leviathan lurking, with jackals howling, with the cold of night descending, with roadside thieves prowling, and an uneasiness settled inside him for having done so. It grew with each step. He marked the place in his mind, a place just to the north of the Dan's Merge, papyrus thickets, a circular grove of trees, a rock shaped like a hammer, so he could find it again. By the time he reached the road, marking his position by noting a Roman milestone 20 paces to the north, the uneasiness lay in the body of his belly like a parasite. There were sounds of men at a campsite, laughter and drinking and fighting. Bandits, likely, who would think nothing of enslaving a young child for the rest of his life, or worse, of killing him for no more reason than the pleasure of it. Since Herod's death, the entire countryside had been set upon by bandits and would-be kings. Travelers were reporting that Sepphoris was in flames. Just 55 miles to the south of Nazareth, at the hands of Judas of Ezekias, the southern sky verified it with its film of hazy smoke. Mahler nearly turned around, then scolded himself for putting thoughts of the boy above the laws of God. He had blasphemed by even daring to do so, by even suggesting to himself that he go back and help the boy while still unclean. Away, foolish thoughts. Act like the priest you are. Obey the edicts of God and of the law. Obtain the garments, then go back for the boy. Obey what is written by God. Put aside the fears. God first, the boy second. God above all else. Once on the road, upon coming closer to the torches and fires of the bandits, Mahler realized that it was not a campsite at all, and that the men were not bandits. They were shouting the name of a lost child. Mahler made a decision. He would break the law of God. He would take whatever punishment Yahweh should choose for him, even death, as befell Uzzah for breaking a commandment and touching the ark. For the child, yes, he would trade his own life. Uncleaned and soiled in blood, he approached the group and inquired who might be the boy's father. I know where your son is, he told the man who came forward. He is safe. I can lead you to him. The man was large and burly, with the eyes and nose of an eagle. His tunic, like his son's, was brown and coarse, of wool and camel hair, breaking another law, where it is written that one must not wear garments woven of two different kinds of materials. Were these Nazarenes? A Nazarene would sooner crack a skull than listen to an explanation, always fighting and drinking, the Nazarenes. Menial workers, the lot of them, not a wealthy nobleman in the bunch. With the group hurrying behind him, Mahler retraced his steps to the Roman mile marker, to the hammer shaped like a rock, or the rock shaped like a hammer, to the Huli Valley below it, to the circular grove of trees and the papyrus thickets, exactly as he had marked it in his mind. He was half running, afraid the boy might not be there. Should the boy be gone, and with Mahler covered in blood, his father and the crowd would think the worst. But Mahler's concerns were larger than that. His concerns were for the boy. The boy was there, washed in the light of the moon that hung barely touching the distant snow-tipped ridges of Hermon, purifying the entire valley in silver. The boy was kneeling by the body, touching it. He had taken the bottom of his woolen camel hair tunic and had dipped it into the water, and with it he was wiping the dead woman's face. The father did not react, apparently not realizing the woman was dead. His only interest was that his boy had been found. He put his arms around him and reprimanded him for wandering off, then came to Mahler to express his gratitude. "Thank you, my good man," he said, and moved to embrace Mahler, as was the custom. Mahler withdrew. "Did you not see that my clothes have been defiled by the blood of the dead?" The boy's father looked confused, as though not understanding what Mahler had said. Then Mahler saw. His tunic was no longer blood-stained. It was gleaming white, pure, radiant. In the moonlight, the tunic seemed to be its own source of light, and the gold and purple sash was once again awash with color. Mahler's first thought was that he was losing his mind. He rationalized that he had been mistaken about the discoloring. Perhaps he had washed the blood out after all, and it didn't seem so at the time because the fabric was not dry, which was another curiosity. There had not been enough time for it to dry. Yet here it was, completely dry. Again the father smiled in gratitude. "Please accept my thanks. If there is anything I can do, offer my hospitality, food perhaps." "No, I am just happy that you are united with your son," Mahler said. "That shall be my reward. But you should see to it that he bathes after having touched the corpse." Confusion returned to the man's expression. Corpse? Mahler motioned to his left and saw the impossible. The dead woman was sitting up. Mahler's beating heart came close to bursting. She had not been dead after all, was the only explanation his mind could put to the happening. Yet there was one thing about which there could be no confusion, no mistake of perception. A short time ago, half her face was torn away. Now there was not so much as a blemish, and she was once again wearing the clothes she had placed in the tree. Said the boy's father before parting, "I wish to express my thanks to your wife as well," whereupon he turned to the dead woman and gave a slow and prominent nod of his head, a sign of greeting and respect. "May the Lord richly bless you both," is what he said. The dead woman was looking around at all the people, perplexed, like she was not remembering any of what had happened, if indeed it had happened. "I am sorry for the trouble the boy has caused you," the father continued. "You must forgive him. You have my word. He will be disciplined. He is an inquisitive and curious child, always asking questions, always wanting to see things he has not seen, always wanting to understand things he could not possibly understand. You see, we've been living afar in Egypt since the boy was 2. He remembers nothing of his homeland and is, you could say, over-anxious to explore it. He loves to hear stories about the countryside. He makes us tell them to him over and over about how barren and dry it is in the south, how rocky and forested it is in the hills of the north, how green it is, how on a clear day you can see the snowy top of a big mountain, and about how someday he will be able to play among the folds of the hills of Nazareth. We have told him about the graceful ibex that climbs the sides of a steep mountain, and about the fox and the jackal and the colorful birds, and about the wolf, Father, reminded the boy. He was clinging to his father's coarse robe, walking around him in annoying circles. It was the first time Mahler had heard him speak. Yes, child, said the father, laying a hand on top of the boy's head, the beautiful and graceful wolf, and about the River Jordan, and about how good it feels to bathe in its clear waters, and about the behemoth that lives and walks upon its bottom. The boy nodded, still circling. I'm afraid he got carried away in his excitement. Oh, I tell you, if it had not been for you and your wife, I shudder to say we may never have found him. If there's anything we can do, just anything. A noise came, a lapping, a subdued splashing. Heads turned. An enormous crocodile was easing its way into the water. The father pulled his son close. That, my son, is one of God's creatures that is not so beautiful. That is a creature we must stay far, far away from. He turned again to Mahler. Oh, all the more reason for me to express my gratitude. You have saved my son's life. Again, if there is anything we can do. Nothing, Mahler assured, probably giving the impression he was only half attentive, which in fact was true. So bewildered and shaken was he. I am happy to have been of service. He thought he saw the frayed end of a rope lap into the water with the crocodile, adding more confusion to these things that could not possibly be happening. The crocodile he had killed, it also had a broken rope around its neck. The man motioned again to embrace Mahler. This time Mahler did not resist. I am Joseph, son of Jacob, the man said, and again I thank you. I am called Mahler. Tell me, Mahler, is it true what we hear, that Herod is dead, and that his son Archelaus rules in his place, and that Judea is full of robberies and seditions? Yes, all true, I'm afraid. Then the matter is settled. We will return to Nazareth, to be as far from Archelaus and the trouble as possible. We were unsure of where we should go, to Nazareth, where we lived before, or to Jerusalem, where my trade as a carpenter and stonemason would doubtless bring more work and more money. But for the boy's safety, we will return to Nazareth. Approach it from the west, said Mahler. Even Galilee is not free from the discord. It spreads and seeps like the poisoned waters of a flood. I am told that Judas of Ezekias and his band have taken hold of Sepphoris. Nazareth is untouched, fortunately. Thank you. It is fortunate, truly, that our paths crossed, said the man. The Lord be with you, Mahler said, as with you. I could not help but notice that you are a priest of Yahweh. I am fortunate that my son has been in such good hands. Thank you again, Mahler acknowledged with a slight bow. The father looked at Mahler powerfully. Until we meet again, he said. Folding his cloak around the boy's shoulders, he made his way up the rocky slope to the road. Waiting above were more people, friends from Egypt likely, or people who had befriended the couple along the way, people traveling together for protection who had fanned out and had been looking in other directions for the boy until realizing the boy had been found. Women, men, children. One of the women must have been the boy's mother because she ran and threw her arms around the child. He thought you were my wife, Mahler said to the dead woman. He forced a laugh. Oh, if only it could be. It cannot be, the dead woman said. Sadness weighed upon the beauty of her face, upon the beauty of her soul. For I am pledged to another. As am I, he said.